I think it's the budget just last week is very, very consequential. And, in some ways, again, we're back to this whole reality versus perception thing, which is actually there was a lot in the budget which was there deliberate to try and counterbalance the impact of the eVED. We got some things in there on charging that we were very supportive and happy about. But at the end of the day, it comes down to whether the consumers are going to buy and how they're going to respond.
We've kind of drifted into the budget, which is a nice topic that I did want to talk about. But before we sort of go into that in detail, I was speaking to an individual who has asked to remain on a non-attributable basis, but is known to all three of you. And he said, nobody in the EV world should be looking at the 3p a mile thing and going, it's not bad, it could be worse. Because in his view, that's not too far from obeying in advance. There should be moves underway to lobby against this. And any green or eco supporter who accepts this without a fight isn't doing their job. There is a lack of joined up thinking, the timing is wrong, and there are numerous other solutions that should be put in place before this tax is implemented. Fairly strong words, I think you'll agree. Anybody like to comment on that?
On the paper, Malik, I absolutely get that. And to be honest, before the budget, we were in that same space. We wrote an open letter to the Chancellor saying that this is the wrong idea at the wrong time. Like, nobody disagrees that we need to have this conversation, but doing it so suddenly with such a specific proposal right now in only 2 years' time is really going to shake and rattle the market. However, it is really clear from what Treasury is saying that this is going to happen. And I think as an organisation, if we don't pivot to try to make sure that it happens in the best way possible for drivers, and also to use it as leverage to make sure, as I say, that money and that regulatory framework is actually targeting the gaps and where it's so, 1.3 billion top up to the electric car grant. That's great, but is the new car grant the right way to put it? Actually, the used car market, we need a stronger, thriving used car market to support the whole transition. So should we be focusing on that with that money? So I don't want them to use these new incentives as a blunt instrument anymore. We want to make sure they're targeted in the right way. And I think as an organisation, if we didn't try to focus on that as well, we would be wasting our time. Because as I say, I think this is a done deal. Treasury have been really clear. We're not expecting them to U-turn on it. Every conversation we've had with Treasury officials is this is happening. What we need to make sure is it works for drivers, the mechanism works, and that the incentives that surround it, that supporting package, is targeted in the right way.
Okay, so
if it's okay for me to come in and support of what Vicky said with a little bit of evidence about quite how destructive 3p per mile has the potential to be. The market impact of 3p per mile doesn't start in 2028 when the policy starts. It started last week when it was announced. In fact, it's before she announced it, because the nervousness and the lack of confidence was sown when she floated various trial balloons, stood at the dispatch box and announced the consultation on the mechanism. Within that consultation on the mechanism, there is zero consideration given to the behavioural impacts. So people getting nervous about and the impacts of the policy on that. And so as a result, its figures about how much that policy, the 3p a mile, is going to raise are inaccurate. Because as the OBR has said, and as the Energy Systems Catapult has modelled, are a far greater reduction in number of people that are going to get into electric vehicles because they're nervous about what this is going to do for them. In addition to that, there's also a problem with the way that the proposal has been constructed for anyone who doesn't own their own vehicle, so leasing in particular. And those are the people who are going to be leasing cars today on a 3-year term, who are going to come straight up against this new tax regime in 2028 that has not been designed for them and has not been bottomed out in terms of exactly how it's going to work for them. It's extremely concerning that the lack of thought from the Treasury, and not to mention that not only will this tax not raise enough to plug the hole it's designed to plug, but it also then will impact our climate change commitments to decarbonise surface transport through into the 20s. It's, the seeds of that are being sown today, and they're not being sown if people are not getting into electric cars. So the ramifications of designing a policy to plug a hole in the tax receipts that has behavioural impacts that cost, the effects of which can last decades, is really can't be understated. Like Vicky says, it is absolutely detrimental to the market that they've decided it's a done deal.
And I think the other thing that not a lot of people have actually, I mean, people will have thought about it, but I haven't seen much out in the public domain about this, is the Office of Budget Responsibility, OBR, whatever it is, have said that as a result of this, there are going to be fewer electric vehicles sold. Now, they pick plucked a figure of 440,000 out of the air on the day of the budget and then walked that back to 150,000, I think. Now, regardless of which figure you choose, that's going to have an impact on the ZEV mandate, which means that there are going to be fewer vehicles sold, but the ZEV mandate is still going to be at that particular percentage. And is this going to give the manufacturers, the OEMs, a little bit more ammunition to push back again on the ZEV mandate? What do we think about that?
I mean, very possibly. I mean, if we just think back 12 months to last Christmas, when Christmas Eve we were all delighted to receive the ZEV mandate consultation, we were having another of these big sort of signposting discussions, and Tanya was right about this. There's lots of detail going on all the time, but there's been at least 3 of these big moments in the last 12 months about, is this happening? Are we accelerating or are we not? We've had the ZEV mandate consultation. Then the decision, yes, okay, we'll settle that as 2030. Then we had some EV car grant in July, and then this. And we've been kind of back and forth and back and forth. It's consumers who receive this messaging, and by gosh, that's 3 pence per mil cut through like nothing else. I'm sure we all had people who aren't in this EV world coming to us saying, what's going on, Vicky? And it's not just consumers, it's investors in charging infrastructure, others who are looking and following. So I think it's the budget just last week is very, very consequential. And, in some ways, again, we're back to this whole reality versus perception thing, which is actually there was a lot in the budget which was there deliberately to try and counterbalance the impact of the eVED. And we got some things in there on charging that we were very supportive and happy about. But at the end of the day, it comes down to whether the consumers are going to buy and how they're going to respond. And obviously there's some estimations in the OBR. Time will tell what that really means. But I don't think we can rest on our laurels and expect that this will just be accepted. I think we're going to have to work quite hard, whether it's a question of going back to the policy itself and looking at, or working with it somehow and trying to communicate to drivers, actually, this still works. This is still, for the vast majority of people, it's still cost effective. I'm sure we'll come on to the public charging part of this later on. But, it's this perception issue which we need to battle very, very heavily.
And I think you brought up an excellent point there, which is, people like me, and I think most of the people on the call, no, I'm saying that, I don't actually know, people like me who can charge at home, p a mile on off-peak, an extra 3p on top of that. I'm still quids in when it comes to looking at that in relation to petrol or diesel. But there's people that I know who listen to the podcast, Abigail Dunbay from Bright, for example, and she'll be jumping up and down and going, yes, but I don't have a home charger. I have to charge on public charging 100% of the time. In Brighton, she's at the mercy of the CPOs who are there, who are not necessarily providing quote-unquote cheaper off-peak rates. So the rate she's paying at the moment is already high, and then there is an additional 3 pence a mile. So talk to me a little bit about, is there anything that Charge UK can do that can help alleviate that? Or is there any influence that Charge UK, for example, can have with the government that can help to influence that and offset this 3p per mile eVED?
Well, I get up most mornings with that in mind, which is, we've got 3 things we continually think about, which is the availability of charge points. And we've talked about how we get more out there, and we've got various work going on to try and remove the barriers to that, including investment barriers. We've got questions around reliability, and maybe we'll come on to that later on. But the one which has been rising up the kind of list of things that consumers talk about is affordability. So that's why we published a paper back in September. I'm really glad we did now, because it was all about how we collectively deliver affordable charging for all. And I think we're very keen to say, for most people, that charging at home is very cost effective. And even if you can't, there are lots of ways to charge affordably. And Gary, you've done several episodes on how to do that. But the truth is that the average cost of public charging has risen in recent years. I think it's 38% since 2021. So we wanted to do something to really acknowledge that. First of all, we know about this, we care, it matters to us. It matters to us not just because we're nice individuals, but actually if the cost of charging is putting people off from switching, that's a problem for us because it means fewer consumers. So we need to do something about it. So we did a piece of work trying to identify, well, why has this happened? And what can we do about it? And I think this is now coming into really sharp focus now. So regardless of what happens with eVED, and I think there will be plenty of discussions about whether that's going to go ahead in its current form. But regardless, we need to do something to look at how we make this viable for everybody, regardless of their situation. So we're doing a huge amount just to pinpoint some of the problems that we've faced as a sector and why those costs are they are. It's really down to three issues. 2 of the first ones are energy related. We all suffered as a country in the energy crisis a couple of years ago, pushing up wholesale prices. The same applies to the business is running charge points, and that level has not really come down significantly, or it has come down for its peak. It's still 66% higher than the start of the decade, and that matters. We've got issues to do with how our standing charges are calculated, and that's the fixed price you pay. For some sites, particularly those rapid and ultra rapid sites, which people want to see, that's risen 462% since 2021, which is an insane figure. And then we've got the ever-present VAT, which sits on top of everything. So there are reasons why public charging costs what it does. As a sector, we are really, really keen to make sure that everyone can charge affordably across a range of different options. And we'll be spending, we've already spending a lot of time trying to address that through various different angles, VAT, equalisation, addressing standing charges. There's various other things that can be done. And we'll be getting on with that even more concretely now that the budget's happened. And this is becoming... cost of public charging is a key differentiator, which is, does this work for you or not?